Beneath the calm surface of some of the world's most beautiful waters, danger lurks in deadly silence. From sudden attacks to desperate rescues, these true encounters reveal the brutal power and unpredictability of nature's apex predators. Brace yourself for 6 heart-pounding stories that expose the fragile line between thrill and terror at sea. It was just after dawn when they received the call. The shark had been caught during a routine research expedition, part of an ongoing migration study off the coast of Durban, South Africa. It was a 14-foot great white, female, healthy and aggressive, just the kind the team at the Durban Shark Institute had hoped to tag. Instead, it was euthanized after repeated failed attempts at safe tagging. Standard procedure dictated a necropsy for data collection. No one expected what they would find inside. Dr. Peter Malan, a veteran marine biologist and lead on the study, guided the dissection alongside 2 junior researchers. The large predator's stomach was partially full, mostly digested fish and seawater, but then something dense and unmistakably human surfaced from the mass. It was a forearm, pale, swollen, and severed just below the elbow. The skin was still intact, and on the wrist sat a pristine Rolex Submariner. The luxury timepiece, almost untouched by seawater and stomach acid, gleamed under the lab's harsh lights. Malan immediately halted the procedure and called local authorities. Detective Layla Naidu arrived on site within an hour. She'd handled marine-related deaths before: drownings, missing swimmers, even occasional suspected suicides, but never anything like this. The researchers provided the coordinates of the shark's capture, and the lab technician had already noted the time and conditions of the necropsy. The arm was placed in evidence storage, and the watch was removed carefully and sent for tracing. By morning, confirmation came. The serial number on the Rolex, traced to Anton Belinsky, a wealthy Swiss businessman, reported missing just the day before. He had been vacationing alone aboard the Vantage, a luxury yacht he'd rented for a week-long trip along the eastern coast. According to the captain and minimal onboard staff, Anton had gone out for a solo dive early in the morning and never returned. A search had been launched that afternoon when his dive gear was found adrift a few hundred meters from the anchored yacht, torn but still buoyant. There had been no mayday call, no sign of a struggle. The boat's systems showed no technical faults. It had been a clear day, with calm waters and good visibility. Anton had planned the dive himself and entered the water at approximately 9:18 a.m., according to the log found on the yacht. By 11 Hancock, when he had not resurfaced, the crew began to worry. By noon, they found the gear. By 2:30, they contacted Marine Rescue. Now, 24 hours later, the mystery had seemingly ended with the discovery inside the shark. But the questions had only deepened. Detective Naidu worked with maritime investigators to analyze the dive gear. The mask and regulator were found with bite damage, jagged tears through the silicone. The buoyancy control device was gashed in multiple places. Its inflation system was sheared off. There was no blood on the equipment, but salt water and sand had scoured much of it clean. A dive computer, still functioning, showed a slow descent to 21 meters. A steady breathing rate, then abrupt stoppage. There was no emergency ascent and no frantic movement. It was as if Anton had simply vanished at depth. Interviews with the yacht crew revealed little. Anton had insisted on diving alone. He seemed calm, prepared, and experienced. He had declined the captain's offer to accompany him or to arrange a local dive guide. He'd done hundreds of dives around the world, often solo. No one saw him re-enter the boat. The crew had remained above deck, assuming all was well, until it was too late. Naidu's team consulted marine behavior experts to build a working theory. The condition of the dive gear suggested a shark encounter, possibly fatal. The clean severing of the arm raised eyebrows, but the absence of other remains could be explained by ocean scavengers or currents. It wasn't uncommon for bodies to vanish quickly in deep waters, especially near reefs where larger predators fed. Forensics determined the severing of the arm had occurred post-mortem. There was no bruising, no bleeding from the limb, which aligned with the theory that the shark had scavenged the body rather than actively hunted it. But why had Anton never called for help? Why had a seasoned diver in perfect condition simply disappeared? Toxicology tests on tissue samples were inconclusive due to saltwater exposure, but nothing pointed to illegal substances or foul play. The most likely scenario was a sudden medical event, cardiac arrest, embolism, or fainting at depth. He could have sunk slowly, unconscious or already dead, while his gear floated upward in pieces after a delayed encounter with the shark. Still, Naidu wasn't satisfied. The Rolex remained pristine, an odd detail, given the trauma the body must have endured. But a specialist confirmed the watch's resilience and ability to withstand intense pressure and corrosive exposure. It had likely survived better than the man who wore it. The case file remained open for a week longer as authorities scoured the area. No other remains were found. Eventually, the police closed the investigation with the most plausible explanation: accidental death by drowning, followed by post-mortem predation. The media ran the story with a mix of intrigue and horror, focusing on the shark and the expensive watch that had led to the victim's identity. But in the station, the detectives spoke of it differently. There was a silence around Anton's final moments, something chilling about how neatly he'd been erased. One moment, a man of immense wealth and power had slipped beneath the water. The next, nothing but a severed arm and a perfect timepiece. The sea had offered no violence and no evidence of struggle. There was only stillness. And then, the bite. For all their data, their instruments, and their calculations, the team was left with a haunting truth. The ocean did not care who you were. It did not flinch at watches or fortunes. It did not cry out when it took you. It simply closed over you and waited for what came next. The midday sun glared off the water as the Odessa floated quietly near a reef shelf off the coast of Western Australia. A light breeze rippled the surface. Below deck, the three men, Alan Reese, Marcus Holloway, and Ben Carter, were finishing a late lunch. The yacht, a sleek 38-foot cruiser, belonged to Marcus, who had invited the others for a weekend getaway. No stress, no business, just open water and reef diving. They had just cleared their plates, laughing over an old story from a previous trip when the first impact hit. It felt like a freight train slamming into the side of the boat. A deep, guttural thud echoed through the fiberglass hull, and everything not bolted down shifted violently. Plates and glasses tumbled from the table. Alan was thrown into the galley bench and Ben stumbled sideways, grabbing a railing to stay upright. Above them, a booming crack reverberated as something massive struck the stern. They bolted for the stairs. Before they reached the deck, the second impact landed, a sharp, devastating blow that sent a shiver through the yacht's frame. Fiberglass split with a cracking shriek. Marcus reached the top first, yanking open the hatch. Salt air rushed in, and so did chaos. The rear swim platform was shattered, splintered across the back of the boat. Water surged through a breach near the lower transom. As Marcus stumbled toward the stern, Alan emerged behind him. Ben followed but lost footing when the boat pitched again. His foot slipped on the now wet steps, and before either of the others could reach him, he tumbled sideways, hit the edge of the broken ladder, and plunged into the ocean. For a few seconds, everything went silent except the churn of waves. Then the water exploded. A massive great white shark surged from below, its head breaching as it latched onto Ben's leg. Teeth met flesh and bone. The impact flipped Ben sideways, the water around him blooming red as the shark's jaws tore through muscle and tendon. He didn't scream, just thrashed violently, arms flailing, head briefly vanishing beneath the surface. Alan leaned over the edge and grabbed Ben by his wrist, trying to hold on, but the weight was impossible. Marcus scrambled to the port side, searching desperately for a life ring. The shark pulled Ben underwater, dragging him backward in a short, violent arc before, without warning, it let go. Ben surfaced with a cry, gasping, one leg limp and shredded. Alan managed to haul him closer, locking an arm around his chest, while Marcus lowered a rope and hooked it beneath his armpits. They heaved together, lifting him slowly, inch by inch, blood soaking their hands. The shark came back. It struck the side of the yacht, bumping it with enough force to stagger them again. As Marcus reached out to steady the rope, the shark surged from the other side, its snout brushing the hull. Its eye caught the light, a flat, empty circle, just as it rose, turning sharply toward them. It came up fast and without hesitation. Alan was bent low, one arm under Ben's shoulder, the other still gripping the rope. As the shark neared the surface, it turned again, this time angling toward Marcus, who was now leaning forward with both hands extended. The shark breached just enough, jaws opening wide, and clamped down on Marcus's forearm. The sound was horrifying, wet, sharp, a mixture of cracking bone and tearing flesh. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his scream echoing across the reef. The shark twisted once, pulling him hard against the rail, but didn't hold long. It released him almost immediately, leaving his arm mangled, the elbow shattered inward. Alan pulled Ben the rest of the way over the edge, both of them tumbling onto the slick deck. Marcus fell back, clutching his arm to his chest, blood pumping through his fingers, already lightheaded. Somehow, Alan reached the radio. The antenna was still up. He pressed the call button and fumbled with the mic, voice hoarse and shaking. He shouted the coordinates and reported a shark sighting along with multiple injuries. He gave the name of the boat. The call was received, though he couldn't be sure of it at the time. The yacht continued to rock beneath them. The shark circled. They could see its dorsal fin now, slicing the surface in wide, slow arcs. It bumped the hull again, testing the damage it had caused. The stern sagged lower than it had before. The broken platform dipped below the waterline. The shark passed within arm's reach twice, each time turning slightly, eye fixed on the movement above. Alan dragged Ben and Marcus toward the front of the boat. Marcus had gone pale. Ben was conscious but silent, staring upward, teeth clenched. They had both lost a lot of blood. Alan kept pressure on Marcus's arm with a towel, checking over his shoulder every few seconds to see if the shark was returning. 20 minutes passed before help arrived. A rescue chopper approached from the west, lowering a winch as a marine response boat sped in from the east. The shark was gone by then. It had vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving the sea calm again, the sun undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. Ben was lifted out first, then Marcus, then Alan. The yacht remained adrift, slowly filling at the stern, blood still smeared across its cracked deck. Later, it was towed back to port, battered, scarred, but floating. All 3 men survived. Ben would undergo multiple surgeries to reconstruct his leg. Marcus's arm would never fully heal, the tendons and nerves damaged beyond repair. Alan had only minor cuts, but he never set foot on a boat again. None of them spoke much to the press. They gave their statements, avoided exaggeration, and let the facts stand on their own. A 5-meter great white had attacked them in broad daylight, without warning, in calm water just a few kilometers from shore. It had breached, struck, and circled with purpose. It had left them alive, but not untouched. The ocean had shown them what it could do, swiftly, without emotion, without hesitation, and they had seen the truth behind its surface, the quiet, cold presence that waited just beneath. The sun beat down on the Gulf Coast, casting a silver sheen across the calm, green-blue waters just off the shoreline of Florida. It was early afternoon, the kind of humid, sweltering summer day that made the beaches overflow with tourists and the airboats buzz around the shallows like insects. Petty Officer Logan Barrett, a 32-year-old United States Coast Guard rescue swimmer with nearly a decade of experience behind him, was stationed on patrol just a few hundred meters offshore aboard a cutter, watching the growing crowds and keeping an eye on swimmers venturing too far from safety. There had been no signs of trouble, no warnings from local lifeguards, no distress calls, and no immediate threat, until the radio crackled to life with urgency. A tourist had been spotted far outside the designated swimming zone, face down in the water, and drifting helplessly farther from shore. It was unclear how long he'd been out there. Logan didn't wait for orders. Within seconds, he had stripped down, grabbed a rescue board, and dove headfirst into the sea, cutting through the swell with powerful strokes, driven by training, instinct, and a sharp edge of adrenaline. As he swam, his eyes remained locked on the lifeless shape in the water ahead of him. The man, likely in his mid-30s and wearing a bright yellow swim shirt, bobbed limply with the current. Logan was no stranger to rescues under pressure, but this one felt different. Too quiet, too sudden, and strangely heavy. Just as he neared the body, maybe 10 meters out, something shifted beneath him. A shadow, broad, fast, and unmistakably alive, passed below. He saw nothing clearly, only the sudden change in the water's texture, the sense that something was rising from below, that the silence had just become dangerous. Logan wrapped his arm under the man's chest, flipped him onto his back, and began swimming hard toward the beach, one arm paddling, the other gripping the unconscious swimmer tightly. He was halfway back when the ocean erupted. From below and behind, a violent force slammed into him. There was no warning, only pain, sharp, immediate, and overwhelming, as a massive bull shark struck with terrifying speed, its jaws clamping down on Logan's right thigh with brutal power. The pressure was unbearable, like steel crushing bone, and his vision flared with red as the water filled with blood. The shark thrashed violently, attempting to twist and pull him under. But Logan, even in agony, refused to let go of the man he had come to save. Desperation took over. He kicked with his left leg and punched blindly with his free arm, striking the shark's head, snout, anything he could reach. The thrashing water made it almost impossible to focus, but he kept fighting, slamming his fist into the creature's tough hide again and again, until finally, it released its grip and disappeared into the depths, leaving behind a cloud of red and a leg that no longer felt like his own. Logan surfaced, gasping, vision spinning, barely able to keep himself and the limp man afloat. With his remaining strength, he paddled furiously toward the shoreline, each motion sending a fresh wave of agony up through his wounded leg. Somehow, he made it into the shallows, dragging both himself and the victim through the crashing surf. Lifeguards sprinted into the water, pulling the unconscious tourist from Logan's grip as he collapsed face first onto the wet sand, salt water and blood mixing beneath him. The medics worked quickly. Pressure was applied to the wound. Radios crackled with urgency. But while Logan was rushed into surgery and stabilized, the tourist was not so fortunate. Despite cardiopulmonary resuscitation and all attempts to revive him, the man, later identified as a vacationer from Illinois, was pronounced dead on the beach. He had likely drowned before Logan had ever reached him. But that truth brought little comfort to the man who had almost died trying to save him. In the hospital, the full extent of Logan's injuries became clear. The bull shark had bitten deep, tearing muscle and fracturing bone. Surgeons removed several teeth embedded in the thigh, and though the femoral artery had somehow remained intact, his blood loss had been severe. He spent weeks recovering, undergoing multiple surgeries, and a slow, painful rehabilitation that would continue for months. The scar would be permanent, a ragged crescent, proof of the moment the ocean turned against him. News of the incident spread quickly. The Coast Guard released a statement. Local and national media picked up the story, drawn to the image of a heroic rescue turned violent. Footage taken from the beach showed part of the chaos: the panicked swimmers, the foam tinted red, and the shark's fins slicing through the surface. Logan became a reluctant symbol of courage and sacrifice, though he never saw himself that way. In his mind, he had done what anyone trained like him would have done. He had reached out to save someone and paid the price when the sea reminded him just how brutal it could be. Experts explained that bull sharks were among the most aggressive species in the world, especially in shallow coastal waters like those near Florida. Territorial and unpredictable, they could attack without provocation. It was mating season, they said. The water was warm, the current was strong. It had all lined up in the worst possible way. Still, their explanations couldn't erase the fear that now lingered along the beach. Attendance dropped. Patrols increased. Warnings were posted at every access point. Logan eventually returned to service. He moved slower, walked with a limp, but remained resolute. He resumed patrols, boarded cutters, and scanned the horizon like he always had. The ocean hadn't changed, and neither had he. But something was different. He now understood more deeply the cost of every call, every rescue, and every decision made in the heart of danger. He never sought vengeance. The shark was never found, and no attempt was made to hunt it. The sea didn't care about justice or fairness. It only moved forward, wild and indifferent. But Logan remembered. Every day he looked at the water, he remembered how quickly it could turn, how a mission to save a life could become a struggle to survive, and how close he had come to not coming back. The waters off Guadalupe Island were calm that morning, the sun glinting off the Pacific as the dive boat rocked gently near a known congregation point for great white sharks. It was late October, prime season for shark tourism in the region, and visibility was excellent. Beneath the surface, shafts of sunlight filtered down, illuminating the deep blue and revealing the sleek silhouettes of multiple great whites moving slowly, purposefully, in the depths below. John and Marissa Holtz, a married couple from Colorado in their early 40s, had come to this remote Mexican island for what was meant to be the highlight of their trip, a cage dive with the apex predator that had fascinated them for years. Both experienced divers, they had undergone the safety briefing with enthusiasm and confidence. They weren't thrill-seekers by nature, but the opportunity to observe great whites up close had pulled them out of their comfort zone and into these wild waters. Now, fully suited in wetsuits and masks, they stood shoulder to shoulder in the lowered cage, suspended 3 meters below the surface, surrounded by vast ocean and steel. Around them, the predators moved in graceful arcs, Some passed distantly, silhouettes fading into blue. Others came close, their massive heads turning slightly as they inspected the cage and the humans inside. Cameras clicked, heartbeats quickened. The mood was tense but controlled. Then a large shark, thicker than the others, over 5 meters in length, with deep scarring along its flank, emerged from the deeper blue, swimming directly toward the cage. Marissa, holding an underwater camera rig, raised it quickly as the shark passed within meters. She leaned forward, gripping one of the vertical cage bars with her left hand for support, her eyes locked on the massive animal's slow, deliberate glide. Her husband, to her right, stayed motionless, aware that sudden movements could trigger an unpredictable response from the shark. For a moment it looked like the animal would pass without incident, but then, in a terrifying and sudden burst of motion, the great white pivoted and accelerated. It slammed headfirst into the cage with bone-rattling force, its jaws wide, its snout crashing against the bars. The impact was thunderous, sending a vibration through the entire structure and shaking the couple inside. The steel groaned loudly. One of the corner welds cracked with a sharp metallic snap. In an instant, the predator's snout pushed partway through the bent cage, and its jaws found Marissa's arm. There was no time to react. The shark clamped down with brutal strength, teeth sinking deep, crushing and slicing through tissue and bone. In the chaos of bubbles and flailing limbs, the weakened bars gave way further as the shark thrashed backward. With horrifying force, it dragged Marissa partially out of the cage, her torso twisting through the bent gap. She struggled, but the predator's power was overwhelming. John reached out with both hands, trying to hold her back, trying to stop what was already happening. Underwater, his scream was lost to the current. The shark pulled harder, its tail swiping through the water in violent sweeps. Marissa's mask dislodged, her camera dropped into the depths, and in a final surge, the great white yanked her fully from the cage. Blood clouded the water in thick plumes. John slammed against the bars, clawing at the bent metal, but the opening was now too wide. He saw his wife disappear into the blur of red and gray, her body spinning as the shark thrashed once more and then let go, leaving her limp and drifting in the murky swirl. Dive crew on the surface had seen the commotion, the burst of bubbles, the thrashing water, the sudden panic, and rushed into action. Rescue divers descended quickly, entering the water from the rear of the boat, armed with poles and first aid kits. They reached Marissa within moments and pulled her toward the surface. Her body was limp and her arm mangled beyond recognition, blood pouring into the sea even as they tried to stem the flow. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation began immediately on the dive platform, the rescuers moving with urgency but without hope in their eyes. John was pulled from the cage shortly afterward, dazed, silent, still dripping with seawater and shock. He stood barefoot on the deck as medics worked on his wife's body. His wetsuit clung tightly to him, stained in streaks of red, and his eyes never left her. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared. Despite every effort made aboard the boat, Marissa Holtz was pronounced dead before they could reach the nearest port. The attack had been too sudden, the damage too severe. Her death was officially ruled as exsanguination from catastrophic limb trauma, an end that had come in less than 2 minutes. In the aftermath, questions surged. The dive company's cage had passed inspections. The boat had followed all safety protocols. The crew had conducted a proper briefing. But even reinforced steel had its limits, and that morning one shark had found those limits and broken them with terrifying ease. Authorities launched an investigation, and tourism companies reevaluated their equipment. Welds were double-checked. Bar designs were reconsidered. Some trips were canceled out of caution. But those changes came too late for the Holtz family. John returned home days later with his wife's ashes and a silence that followed him like a shadow. He gave no interviews, refused media requests, and never joined the online forums filled with shark enthusiasts and divers trying to make sense of the event. He had come to Guadalupe seeking wonder, a brush with nature's raw beauty. What he found instead was a nightmare, unfolding in slow motion through steel bars that were never supposed to break. The diving community mourned, but the ocean moved on. The sharks returned to the reef as they always had, unbothered by the human tragedy above. And those who stepped into cages after that day did so with the sobering knowledge that in the deep, there are no guarantees, only risk, beauty, and the ever-present chance that the sanctuary they trusted could shatter in an instant. The beach in South Africa had been packed since early morning, the sun burning high overhead. Families clustered under umbrellas, children sprinted between crashing waves, and the hot wind swept over the golden sand in lazy bursts. The water was unusually warm for late summer, and surfers and swimmers dotted the surf zone in every direction. The flags were green, the lifeguard towers manned, and the sea on the surface looked inviting and calm. Among the swimmers was Thomas Meyer, a 32-year-old local teacher and avid open-water swimmer. He had arrived early, parked his car along the road with the rest of the weekend crowd, and waded into the water with the quiet confidence of someone who had grown up by the sea. He was fit, lean, and strong from years of swimming in the Atlantic, and he favored solitude in the deeper sections where the swell rose and fell in long, rolling rhythms. That morning, he had swum parallel to the shoreline, just beyond the last of the bodyboarders, immersed in the ocean's pulse. A few hundred meters away, lifeguards kept a steady watch from their elevated tower, binoculars sweeping the water every few minutes. But no one saw the shadow at first. No one noticed the broad slate-gray form slicing just beneath the surface, hidden by glare and churn. Later, marine experts would say it was the unusual warmth of the inshore currents that brought the predator so close. A 5-meter great white shark, moving silently beneath the morning surf, veered off the deeper line of kelp beds and began angling toward the shallows. At precisely 11:43 a.m., everything changed. There was a flash of motion in the water, an eruption just meters from shore, and then a scream ripped across the beach. Sunbathers turned. Lifeguards shot to their feet. A wave rolled in red. The shark had struck with terrifying speed, breaching just enough for its dark fin to become visible as it latched onto Thomas's leg. The jaws clamped down hard, tearing muscle and sinew in a single motion. He thrashed violently, arms windmilling as the force of the strike pulled him partly underwater. The nearby waves, once gentle, exploded with foam and blood. People froze. Dozens stood motionless on the shoreline, staring in disbelief at the horror unfolding only meters from where children had played seconds earlier. A second scream, shorter, strangled, cut through the noise as Thomas fought to keep his head above water. The shark thrashed again, jerking him backward, pulling him into a deeper pocket of the surf. His arms flailed against the sea, but the predator's grip did not loosen. Lifeguards sprinted down the sand, diving into the surf with rescue buoys and boards, their radios crackling behind them. A whistle blew sharply. People shouted, some fleeing from the tide, others rooted in place with hands over their mouths. One man tried to wade into the water to help, only to be pulled back by another bystander. The shark held onto its target for just under 10 seconds before it released, perhaps startled by the sudden chaos or disinterested in a second strike. Blood poured from Thomas's leg as he screamed again, managing to stay afloat through sheer instinct. A lifeguard reached him seconds later, throwing an arm around his chest and kicking toward shore with brutal urgency. Another lifeguard met them halfway, helping stabilize his body across a board. The rescue crew dragged Thomas to the wet sand, his leg a shredded mess of exposed tissue and broken bone. He was semi-conscious, breathing in quick, high-pitched gasps as the lifeguards applied pressure and began wrapping the injury. His skin was pale, his lips blue. A trail of blood stretched from the surf line to his side on the beach. An ambulance had already been called. Tourists and locals formed a wide circle around the scene, phones in hand, some crying, others frozen in place. Children were led away by anxious parents. The water, once filled with laughter and movement, now sat strangely still. Lifeguards cleared the beach within minutes, their whistles shrieking over the roar of incoming waves. The red flag was hoisted, swimming prohibited. When paramedics arrived, they moved quickly, stabilizing Thomas, elevating his leg, and loading him into the ambulance. The siren wailed as it pulled away, heading toward the nearest trauma center in Cape Town. He would later undergo emergency surgery, the shark bite having severed major arteries and crushed the bones in his lower leg. Doctors managed to save his life, but not his leg. News of the attack spread rapidly. By afternoon, the beach was closed. Helicopters scanned the coastline. Shark spotters posted updates, and marine biologists reviewed current patterns, noting how the temperature shifts may have pushed predators closer to shore. Interviews were declined. Statements were issued. Locals were rattled. The beach was known for surfing, not shark attacks. Shark spotters had done their jobs for years without major incident. But this was different. This was public, brutal, fast. It wasn't far offshore. It was within sprinting distance. Swimmers returned weeks later, but fewer entered the water, and those who did kept closer to the lifeguards, eyes scanning the horizon more often than before. Thomas spent weeks in recovery, He declined media requests, speaking only once in a statement read by a hospital staff member. He expressed gratitude for the lifeguards who risked themselves to save him and acknowledged the ocean's unpredictability, saying he bore no anger toward the shark, but he never returned to the beach. The beach remained beautiful. The waves still rolled, but something had changed. The attack had broken the illusion of safety, shattered the idea that danger always lingered out beyond the breakers. It had crept in, silent and unseen, and struck in broad daylight before hundreds of witnesses. The ocean kept its secrets, but the beachgoers remembered. The moment lived on, not just in video, not just in reports, but in the minds of those who saw the blood churn in the waves, heard the cries, and realized that even at the shoreline, the predator was never far away. The sun was high over the reef that afternoon, casting a shimmering lattice of light across the turquoise water near a remote stretch of sand in Fiji. The tide was low, the lagoon calm, and the coral shelf that protected the bay stretched far into the distance. It was a postcard-perfect scene, serene, quiet, and seemingly safe. Ethan Rawiri, a 35-year-old New Zealander who had relocated to Fiji with his wife and son the year before, had taken the day off to fish along the edge of the reef. His 5-year-old son, Luca, trailed behind him that morning and now played near the shore, giggling as he kicked up splashes in the ankle-deep water. Ethan had chosen this spot for a reason. The current was soft, the reef formed a natural barrier, and the water near shore was shallow enough that Luca could safely wade and play with a plastic bucket and net while he worked his line. The quiet stretched through the afternoon, broken only by the occasional call of seabirds and the soft slosh of water against sand. Luca crouched in the water, running his fingers through the sand to collect small shells, his laughter drifting toward the reef's edge. Ethan kept one eye on him while baiting a fresh hook, pleased that his son was enjoying the solitude and stillness of the cove. No one saw the shadow glide in through the reef's outer edge. Later, marine specialists would point out how tiger sharks, often curious and unafraid, occasionally entered lagoons like this one during high tide, especially when fish activity stirred near the shoreline. It wasn't hunting in the traditional sense. It was investigation, driven by instinct and appetite. And sometimes, tragically, it found the wrong target. Luca had wandered a little farther from shore, following a small crab that darted between his toes. The water reached just above his knees now, and he giggled as he tried to trap the creature with his net. Just as he leaned forward, there was a sharp ripple in the water behind him, swift and silent. And then the world erupted. The shark struck without warning. Luca's scream shattered the quiet, high and shrill, filled with confusion and pain. The tiger shark's jaws clamped onto the lower part of his calf, ripping through flesh and muscle with horrifying ease. The boy stumbled, splashing wildly, his small arms flailing as the water around him turned red. Ethan dropped his rod and sprinted through the shallows, heart pounding with panic. His feet hit the water with violent urgency as he spotted the red bloom expanding around Luca. For a second he thought his son was drowning. Then he saw the tail, a massive sweeping arc just beneath the surface, and understood the truth. By the time Ethan reached him, the shark had released and disappeared back into deeper water. Luca was conscious but screaming, clutching his leg as blood poured down into the sea. Ethan scooped him up in both arms, stumbling through the shallows toward shore, trying to keep his footing as he cradled the injured child. Luca trembled violently in his arms, his sobs raw and panicked, his body coated in water and blood. Laying him gently on a dry patch of sand, Ethan tore off his shirt and wrapped it tightly around the mangled lower leg, applying pressure with both hands as he fumbled for his phone. His hands were slick with blood, fingers trembling as he dialed for help, barking out coordinates to the local emergency responder over a shaky connection. Luca gasped and whimpered beneath him, his face pale, his lips trembling. The bleeding was heavy but slowing under the pressure, though the sight of the wound, a ragged bite, deep and jagged with visible tendon, made Ethan's stomach churn. He kept talking to his son, repeating soothing words, even though Luca couldn't hear them over the ringing in his ears and the thudding pulse of pain. Within 15 minutes, a small emergency boat from a nearby resort arrived, guided in by Ethan's frantic waving. Luca was lifted aboard, his legs stabilized with makeshift supports, and rushed toward the main island where a medevac helicopter was waiting. The boy faded in and out of consciousness, clinging weakly to his father's hand as they lifted off. At the hospital in Nadi, Luca underwent emergency surgery. The damage to his calf was severe, but the shark's bite had missed major arteries and nerves by mere centimeters. Surgeons worked for hours to clean and close the wound, sparing him from worse outcomes. His leg would bear the scars for life, but it would heal. He would walk again. The news of the attack spread quickly across the island and then beyond. Local officials posted warnings, and marine patrols searched the reef for the tiger shark, though there was little chance of identifying or stopping it. Tiger sharks are nomadic, and this one had likely already moved on. The cove was declared temporarily off-limits for swimming. The community, tight-knit and protective, gathered around the Rawiri family in the days that followed, shaken but grateful that Luca had survived. Ethan barely slept for the first 2 nights. He sat beside Luca's hospital bed, holding his son's hand while the machines beeped softly in the background. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the scream, the blood, the rush through the shallows, and couldn't shake the feeling that he should have seen it coming. But everyone told him otherwise. No one expected a shark to come that close to shore, especially in water barely waist-deep for a child. Luca was brave. Even in pain, he gave a weak thumbs up to the nurses and asked about his bucket and net. He remembered the crab. He remembered the sudden pressure on his leg and how fast the water turned red, but not much more. In time, doctors said, the physical wounds would heal. The fear might take longer. The incident became a chilling reminder that even the most peaceful waters carry unseen threats. What was meant to be a simple day of father-son bonding had almost ended in tragedy. But Luca had survived, and that survival was marked by fast action, unwavering courage, and the unpredictable fury of nature brushing terrifyingly close to taking everything. The reef remained beautiful, but for the Rawiris and the entire island community, it would never feel quite the same again.